Hi, I'm back. So this is the final video in the series on natural law. And let's pick up where we left off. So with the idea of natural purposes. And this is the next stage of the argument that Schaefer-Landau makes, trying to defend a natural law theory of ethics. Remember, that whole approach depends on having a clear conception of human nature that explains the origin and the basis of our moral standards. The first three conceptions of human nature that he looks at don't seem to do the job, right? So if we try to understand our moral standards in terms of our animal nature, in the sense like acting naturally means acting as the other animals do, that doesn't seem to work. It's not the case that acting as the other animals do is the same as acting morally. Oftentimes, right, it leads to immoral action. Similarly with the concept of human nature as what is innate to us. Just because we are acting in accordance with a quality that is innate to us doesn't mean we're doing the right thing. And so that conception of human nature also doesn't seem to explain our moral intuitions very well. And then finally, we could define human nature in terms of what is common to most or all human beings. But again, right, there may be qualities, maybe most of us are selfish. It doesn't follow that acting selfishly is morally good. So those three conceptions of human nature don't seem to give us enough to form the basis of our moral standards. Okay. Perhaps we could think about human nature in terms of our function as human beings, our proper function or our purpose. If we could identify our function or our purpose, right, then moral action could be defined in terms of those choices, those decisions, those actions that accord with our function, with our purpose, right? That enable us to fulfill our purpose or perform our function well. Okay, so that's the view that Thomas Aquinas develops. And notice right off the bat, talking about function seems to put us in the realm of religion or thinking about God. One of the appeals of thinking about human nature as the source of morality is that it seems to be naturalistic, right? It's something that science studies. It can be measured from a scientific standpoint. But once we start talking about purposes, well, that seems to be to bring in some non-scientific way of thinking. Okay, that's a problem for some. It's not a problem for Aquinas, right? So if we could turn really quickly to Aquinas, we can see, right, that he's going to defend the idea of natural law as something that is in us, right, as a result of God's act of creation, right? Now, this presupposes that there is a law that has been there forever, right? And so the first question that he raises is, is there an eternal law, right? A moral law, or in this sense, like a law that determines our function, right, in the world. Does such a law exist eternally, right? That's the first question that Aquinas thinks about in this excerpt from a much longer book. So you're reading excerpts from a much longer book called Summa Theologica. And just note, I'm not going to give a close reading of all of this. It's a lot, but just to think about the structure of Aquinas's arguments, right? So he starts with a question: is there an eternal law? And he right off the bat thinks about objections to the claim that there is an eternal. So he's going to defend a positive answer to that question. Yes, there is an eternal law. His whole theory of morality depends on there being one eternal law that is imposed on us by God. But he starts by considering objections, right? And passages from other texts that support a negative answer to this question. It would seem that there is no eternal law because every law is imposed on someone, but there was not someone from eternity on whom a law could be imposed. God was there eternally, but nothing else, right, is eternal. So there was a time when there was just God and there was no one to impose the law on. So the law, if a law can only exist if there's someone to impose it on, then the law did not exist eternally, right? That's the objection. And there's a passage that he quotes from Augustine that seems to suggest that there is an eternal law, right? So Augustine's passage here suggests that the law, which is the supreme reason, cannot be understood to be otherwise than unchangeable and eternal. So that's a passage from a philosopher named Augustine that now Aquinas is going to defend. Okay, so this is the moment where he begins to defend his view. I answer that. What is he answering? I'm answering these objections. right? And he gives a reason for thinking that the law is eternal, even though there was no one to impose it upon, right, before the creation of man. Okay, so and then he has replies to the specific objections. Okay, so this is his general view about why the law is eternal, and then he replies to specific objections. And notice like that form is taken by each section of Aquinas's writing. So now he moves to another question. Okay, the law is eternal, but is it in us naturally? Is the law in us as a natural law? Well, right, is God's eternal law in us by nature? That's the question. Well, it would seem that there is no natural law in us. That's the objection. So notice again, Aquinas is going to be defending an affirmative answer to all these questions, but it begins with an objection. It says, no, there is not a natural law in us. Okay, it would seem that there is no natural law in us. That's how it appears, because man is governed sufficiently by the eternal law. So God's law is enough, right, to govern man. We don't also have to have a natural law built into us. Further, by the law, man is directed in his acts to the end, but the directing of human acts to their end is not a function of nature, as is the case in irrational creatures, which act for an end solely by their natural appetite, whereas man acts for an end by his reason and will. Therefore, no law is natural to man. Here, the idea is that we give ourselves a law, but it's not in us by nature. What's in us by nature is just the tendency to satisfy basic appetites, right? But human beings' actions are directed toward ends that they give themselves, right? But the function or the purpose of human life is not given to us. It's something we determine for ourselves, right? So, right, man is free, right? He's not governed by a law that's in him. He gives himself his own law. Okay, so that's the objection, and then Aquinas is going to argue no, right? The law is in us. Of course, we make choices, but that doesn't follow that there isn't a law that's in us that governs our behavior, our actions, and that points us in the direction of a purpose or an end or a function. Okay, so he's trying to defend here the idea not only that there is a moral law that has existed eternally, but that in us there is a natural law that inclines us toward an end, right, or a purpose. Okay. So again, I answer that as the place in Aquinas where he's presenting his view, and then he replies to the objections, right, to give a defense of his view. So he states his view here, and the replies are kind of defending the view against the objections that were given at the beginning of the passage. Okay, and he goes on, right? Is the natural law the same in all of us, or is it different for each of us, right? And so he's trying to defend the idea that there's one natural law, one purpose that's the same for all of us. Okay, again, he starts with objections and then presents his view. I answer that, right? That's Aquinas' view, and then he replies to the objections. Okay, so I mean, here he gives a kind of a clearer sense of what he means by the natural law, right? Since, however, good has the nature of an end and evil the nature of a contrary, hence it is that all those things to which man has a natural inclination are naturally apprehended by reason as being good. Right? Right? We have in us like a capacity for reason, right? That's part of our nature. So according to the order of natural inclinations is the order of the precepts of the natural law, because in man there is first of all an inclination to good in accordance with the nature which he has in common with all substances. By reason of this inclination, whatever is a means of preserving life and of warding off its obstacles belongs to the natural law. So there's something concrete, right? We are by nature aimed at the preservation of our lives and warding off anything that destroys our life. Okay. Secondly, there is in man an inclination to things that pertain to him more specially, according to that nature which he has in common with other animals. Okay, so this is part of our nature, right? We are inclined toward sexual intercourse, the education of offspring. So producing more children, educating them, this is part of our nature, part of our function, right? Not just preserving life, but producing more life and educating those that we produce, right? And okay. what else belongs to our nature? The inclination to know the truth, right? About God, about other things, to live in society, right? It belongs to our nature to enter into society. Right? So he gives something concrete here about what our natural inclinations are. This tells us something about our function, right? Our purpose. Okay? So this is where Aquinas is trying to defend this idea, this concept, going back here, this idea that we have natural purposes that are in us, right? And that determine our natural inclinations, right? And so the thought here is that this is tied to sort of the act of creation, right? God created us and designed us to have these purposes, these functions. But as Schaefer-Landau points out, well, that's a part of the view that maybe we can separate. Maybe it's possible to think about our natural functions, our natural purposes in terms of like mechanisms of evolution and natural selection, rather than God. Maybe the source of our functions, our purposes, comes from evolution. And so this is a way of trying to defend natural law theory, right, without defending a particular view about God. Okay, so but then, what is a human being for, right? So there's two models, right, of our natural purpose that Schaefer-Landau considers, right? The efficiency model and the fitness model. So on the efficiency model, right, think of the heart, right? The heart is the best part of our body for pumping blood, right? That's its function, right? It has a structure that enables it to pump blood more efficiently than anything else in the body, right? So that's the purpose of the heart. The purpose of something is what it does most efficiently. So human beings, right, do some things more efficiently than any other beings, right? So that would be our set of purposes, right? Those things that we do more efficiently than any other being. The problem with that view is that some of those things are pretty scary, right? We are more efficient at making weapons of destruction. We are more efficient at making instruments to torture people, right? That doesn't mean that making weapons and making instruments of torture is morally good, right? So if we're trying to derive morality from the functions or the purposes, the functions that we perform most efficiently, right? Then that seems to lead to problematic conclusions about what's moral. So maybe we could look at the fitness model, right? If the efficiency model doesn't work, what about the fitness model? Well, here the idea is that right, our purpose is defined in terms of what enhances our fitness, right? What enhances our ability to succeed at survival and reproduction, right? So we define our nature, our purpose, in terms of our ability to survive and reproduce, right? And so acting naturally means doing those things that make it easier for us to survive and reproduce. That's what our purpose is. We are meant to survive and transmit our genes to the next generation. That's what human life is for, right? So that's the fitness model. But again, that doesn't seem to tell us what to do in any interesting moral sense, right? Doing whatever is necessary to survive and reproduce doesn't always lead to the most moral decisions, right? So if that's what acting naturally means, just fulfilling our purpose, in the sense surviving, reproducing, right? That's not always moral, right? And acting unnaturally then is defined as frustrating those purposes, right? Not doing things that make it more likely that we will survive and reproduce, right? But that's not always immoral. Sometimes we have to sacrifice ourselves, right? Or sometimes we have to choose not to have children, for example. And it's not always a morally bad thing, just because it goes against our purpose according to the fitness model. So again, both models, he thinks, fail to explain the origin of our moral standards. Okay, so that's where he ends up, and then he draws some conclusions, and you can sort of look at the conclusions that he draws. Okay, hope that was useful. I'll see it. That's the end of this video. I know I rushed a little bit at the end, but just giving you a sense of how to read the two texts together. Okay, I'll see you soon. Bye.